Okay, today's topic is going to be how we handle files in Blender and how we save our projects, open our projects, and make sure that all the data that we need in Blender is where we expect it to be for future use. So when we talk about files in Blender, what we're really talking about is a special type of file called a .blend file. So some of you that have worked with word processors before, or maybe Photoshop, or any editing program, you probably have at least a basic understanding of file extensions and how different files can be opened in different programs. So, on a Mac, if you don't have Microsoft Word, you can't open files that end in .doc. I'm going to show you on my file system I have a whole bunch of files that end in .blend. See right there, a little bit so we can see it. We have .blend files. A .blend file is just a file that Blender knows how to open, and it includes all the information that has to do with the project that you are working on. One thing that's really important to keep in mind here is that a .blend file is not a final finished product. So a .blend file is not an animation, it's not a picture. All a .blend file contains is the information Blender needs to be able to open a project. So if we go into Blender, let's talk about how we save and close and open files. So for those of you that have done any sort of editing on a computer before, you know that saving is incredibly important, and Blender is no exception. You want to save often. Blender is an excellent program, but it does have a tendency to crash if it gets overloaded. So we want to make sure that every time we do something major or complete a piece of our work, that we are saving our project. So there's actually two steps in Blender that we want to follow to save our project. And these steps are outlined in the PowerPoint that goes along with this video lecture, but in that PowerPoint they're kind of spread out. So I want to highlight them here now. Just like in Microsoft Word or any of those other programs, we save a project by using Control S, or on a Mac, we use Command S. The alternative, which I'm going to show you here so you can see it, is to go up to File and then Save. Saving obviously saves the existing project. If we wanted to save our project as a copy, then we would do Save As. And again, these functions should be pretty familiar to anyone who has worked with Microsoft Word or a similar editor before. The issue is that before we save, there's a little checkbox that we want to find. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom of the file window, I've got this little checkbox that says automatically pack into .blend file. Now, for the examples I'm going to show you today, this checkbox doesn't matter because all this checkbox does is make sure that our textures and any color that we've added are included in the file. So for these simple examples, we don't care, but it's a good habit to, or it's a good thing to get in the habit of, because when you guys make more complicated projects, you're going to want to make sure that all the data is packed into your blend file. So before we save, the first time we save, we always want to check that little box. And so when I click that, if I go back into my file window and I hover over external data, I can see that that little checkbox now has a check mark in it. So I know that I am packing all of my external files into my .blend file. That's exactly what I want. Even though it's not necessary for all projects, I highly recommend that you always do it. Okay? Always make sure that you're packing your file before you save it the first time. After you've done this once, you don't need to do it again. You can save this file as many times as you want and not worry about having to repack it. So I'm going to go to Save. And as you can see, this brings up a window that shows some of the files on my file system. The first window up here shows me where I'm saving it to. So one thing that's incredibly necessary for working on Blender projects in this class is you want to make sure that you have a dedicated folder for which to save your Blender projects. Mine is under my home directory, the Joshua directory, and then I made a Blender folder and then the blend files directory. It doesn't matter to me where you save it, but you should have a separate folder. For example, if I look over here to my desktop, you can see that there are no folders on my desktop. I might want to go on my desktop outside of this, or I can go up here to create a new directory and create a folder called Blender or something like that so that I can keep all of my projects in the same place. Okay, I'm going to go back to blend files. So right here, untitled.blend is where we put our file name. We want to leave .blend unchanged, but where it says untitled, we want to change that. Major rule in this class, never keep your files named untitled. It's very confusing. Your project should always be called something that you can understand. For example, if I'm going to cancel out of this window for a second. This project is just a cube. There's nothing else going on in this scene besides the cube itself. So when I save, I'm going to save this as cube.blend. And I'm going to save my Blender file. Now that save happened really quickly because there's not a lot happening in this project. If we had a bigger project, it might take longer to pack it and save it. Now some of this may seem like it's pretty straightforward based on your use with other computer programs and saving and loading and all that stuff. But I promise you there's going to be some stuff, some little differences, subtle differences that we need to make sure we keep track of. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close Blender. And then just to make sure that everything's saved the way I expected it to, I'm going to find my cube.blend file, and I'm going to double click it. Now you'll notice that all of our blend files have an associated Blender icon. So if you're looking on your file system, either on a Mac or a Windows machine, both of them will work. These little Blender icons indicate that these files can be opened with Blender. So if I open cube.blend by double clicking it, it's going to open Blender and give me my project, cube.blend. Another project I want to show you really quickly for the next step in our saving and loading process is one that I've created called Cone. If I open cone.blend, you can see that cone.blend is just a cone, just like our cube.blend. So a cone is the only object that I've created here. What we're going to do with cone.blend and cube.blend is we are going to put these objects in the same file by adding the cone.blend file to the cube.blend file. And in Blender, we call this appending files. Now, instead of closing Blender again, I'm going to open a project using a slightly different method. I can either use Control and O or Command and O if you're on a Mac. These are the same shortcuts as a word processor. Now, if you forget any of these shortcuts or you're not writing them down as I talk to you about them, remember that all of these shortcuts are available in the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Open, and I'm going to find cube.blend, and then I'm going to click, so I found cube.blend, I'm going to click Open Blender File. Okay, here's my cube file. Now I want to combine everything that's in my cone.blend with my cube.blend. So I want to end up with these two files being merged. So we've covered saving files, we've covered opening files. Now I'm going to move on to appending files. If you have any notes that you want to catch up on or anything in the lecture that you want to review, now would be a good time to pause and do that before I move on to appending. To append, we're going to go to the same place that we look for saving and opening. We're going to go to File, but instead, we're going to find the Append option. Those of you who might not be familiar with the word append, append is like add, or add to the end of. So if I go to Append, it's going to give me an option of some Blender files that I can choose. So these are all my Blender files. I want to bring in the information that's inside the cone. So I'm going to click on cone.blend. Now something totally different happened here. I'm going to go back to show you it again. When I open a file, all I have to do is click on the blend file and then open it, and it'll show up in Blender. When I am appending, I need to tell Blender exactly what it is from that file that I'm bringing over. If I click cone.blend, it gives me all of these folders that hold the data of cone.blend. The only thing that I care about right now are the objects. And for the most part in this course, we're not going to care about a lot of the other stuff. But basically, these are all the other things going on in the cone.blend project. If I click object, I can see there are 3 objects here. There's the camera, the lamp, and the cone. Now, I've already got a camera and a lamp in my scene, so I don't need to add another lamp. I don't need to have 2 cameras. All I care about is bringing in this cone. So I'm going to select the cone, and then I'm going to click Append from Library. And there you have it. It's hard to see because my cone is inside the cube, but it's there. So, now that I've got my cone brought into this scene, it doesn't really make sense for me to call this cube.blend anymore. And you can see up here, it still is my cube.blend file. Blender at the top shows you that I'm working with this particular project. So, for those of you that have worked in something like Microsoft Word or Photoshop or any other editor before, you probably know that if you want to save something, but you want to save it with a different name, we go to File, Save As. On Windows, you can use Shift-Control-S as a shortcut. On Mac, you can use Shift-Command-S. Save As. Now notice that this is red. This is red right now because cube is already a blend file. And so if I tried to call it that, I would just overwrite the original file, and my cube.blend file would suddenly have a cone in it. I don't want that. Now would be a good time to talk about file guidelines. In this class, and in most of my classes, you should not have spaces in your file name. For example, I want to call this cube and cone. This is a bad file name. I do not want spaces between my words. If I have a file name that has multiple words in it, then I should either separate them with underscores. This is one example that's acceptable. Cube underscore and underscore cone. That is fine. Or, if we wanted, we could do capital C cube, capital A and capital C cone. That would be another acceptable file name. I do not want to see spaces, and I do not want to see any files named untitled. Okay? So I'm going to call mine cube underscore and underscore cone just because I think it's easier to read. Like there's spaces there, even though there's not. This may never be an issue, but when you work a lot with files in many different editors, sometimes you can run into problems if you leave spaces in your file names. So we're just going to avoid that potential headache and only use underscores or not put any spaces at all. All right, so I'm going to do save as. And now, just to test, I'm going to go to File and Open, and I'm going to try to open the original cube file to make sure that it's unchanged. You saw there I opened cube.blend, and I get my cube. If I go back to File and Open, and I go to cube and cone.blend, I'm going to open that guy. I've got my cube and my cone that's peeking through. So that's how we work with files in Blender. The big thing to keep in mind is that these .blend files, as I said before, are not finished products. I cannot open these guys in an image editor. I cannot open these guys to watch an animation. These are just Blender files. Some of you have probably experienced this before if you've taken a class with Photoshop or if you've done any image editing. You know that when you've got a finished product, your finished product is probably something like a JPEG or a PNG or an image, right? And when you're working in Photoshop, you have a Photoshop file that keeps track of your work. This is the same idea. These just keep track of our work in Blender. What we're going to learn about very soon is how we render our images and then how we get a finished product. A lot of what you're going to be turning in this class are finished products, but the first few lessons are going to be just dealing with blend files. So keep in mind the file name conventions, keep in mind how we save and how we load and how we append. And don't forget to make sure that you're always packing your Blender file. That concludes our lesson on opening, saving, and dealing with Blender files. Make sure you take a look at the accompanying PowerPoint so you know you've got all the vocab handled and you've got everything there to review if you